Legendary! Legendary!
That's also from 1989. Well, in 1989, The Simpsons became its own official TV show, but years before that, it was a cartoon short on the Tracy Ullman Show. And me and my sister kept looking at each other every week when we watched these cartoon shorts and said, that should be its own TV show. I forget exactly which sister, though. Yeah, one of those two. And The Simpsons signifies the earlier argument I made about how 1989 signaled a real changing of the guard. I first pointed it out with music, how some of the more established 80s artists, while still doing their thing, you know, they in 89 at least, they paled in comparison to the new artists who just dominated the charts. I mean, Paula Abdul had three #1 hits in 1989 alone, and that was her big debut year. And to further change the guard, pointing out the elephant in the room, is the presidential inauguration we had in 1989. Ronald Reagan was no longer president as of late January 89. Ronald Reagan was the fucking 80s. So we got a new president in the final year of the decade, and the music scene was changing. Now let's talk about The Simpsons. You see, the 80s is pretty much known for having the last of the real family-friendly sitcoms, such as Growing Pains, Family Ties, and The Cosby Show. And then the 80s really also started the, what's really widely known and popular today. We have the dysfunctional family sitcom. The first real dysfunctional family sitcom was 1987's Married with Children. And The Simpsons followed. Now, talking about the changing of the guard in 89, The Simpsons, and probably the ultimate family-friendly show of the 80s, The Cosby Show, actually went head-to-head in the same time slot. And it didn't take too long at all for The Simpsons to overthrow The Cosby Show. And shortly after, not too long after losing that ratings war, I mean, Cosby Show was pretty much on its way out. And sooner than later, it did go out. And here we are in 2015. The Simpsons is still fucking here. So you see, that's what I mean by changing of the guard. 1989 just really changed things, changed the 80s, even though it still was the 80s.
Michael Jackson's Moonwalker video game, only on the Genesis system by
And I mentioned how it's now 2015. So, since we're talking about 1989, my final episode here in 2015, where we're talking about 1989, how could I possibly ignore a movie that was released in 1989 and showed at least its interpretation of 2015? Back to the Future 2, bitches! Before I continue, I just have to address things that are being said about me and my show. See, a lot of people, namely the 80s kind of twins, are really upset that my show is coming to an end. I've even been accused of quitting. Well, no, I'm not quitting. You see, when I made the whole jumping the shark reference in one of my episodes, and I mean, let's face it, after episode 40, Christmas in July, up until the milestone 50th episode, you know, the 40s in my episodes, you'd be hard-pressed to find a really good one. you know, for a short while there between the Ice Bucket Challenge and Robin Williams dying and everything, I really had a hard time. I mean, my show just suffered. It really did. And, you know, I thought I'd lost my mojo, or that the show was just on a permanent steep incline. And now I finally got the winning formula again. The show is really, really good again. So I basically want to go out on top. Granted, you know, the creativity is back, but along with all the other projects I have to do, and hell, the 2010s are both showing you how much they suck in general, more than I could ever talk about, and keeping the 80s alive more than I probably ever could. Because, shit, think about it. They just came out with a Poltergeist remake, which wasn't half bad. They came out with another Terminator, which was fucking awesome. And, you know, they're coming out with the Gym. Already looks shitty without the Misfits. But I mean, still, they're trying to keep the 80s alive. They're remaking Ghostbusters. There's talks of a Gremlins remake. You know, the Goldbergs on TV shows about the real family of the Goldbergs in the 80s. And they're coming out with a Masters of the fucking Universe movie. And I mean, yeah, they're showing you the shitty stuff. And then they're also showing you, hey, the 80s rules. And we're going to try to remake the 80s. So my services are no longer really needed on top of all that. Again, I don't see myself as quitting. I see myself as going out on top while I'm still red hot. Like a certain TV show that many people don't realize made its debut in 1989. Suck it, 1990s. Your best stuff. The Simpsons, Seinfeld. Oh, need I go on? All this stuff you think made the 90s so great is 80s stuff, bitches. Let's see. What else was the 90s really known for? TGIF? Oh yeah, TGIF was good. But what was the bread and butter of TGIF, huh? Full House and Family Matters? Those are both products of the 80s. I already mentioned Married with Children. Shit. 90s, you're only good because of the 80s. What about cartoons, though? You know, I was a child in the 80s, so I reminisce about a lot of the cartoons. Is there any cartoons that made the 90s so great? You know what? Yes, there was. And easily one of the greatest cartoons of the 90s also debuted in 1989.
Life is like a hurricane here in Duckburg. Race cars, lasers, aeroplanes. It's a duck blur. Might solve a mystery or rewrite history. DuckTales, woo. Every day they're out there making DuckTales, woo. Tales of daring, do bad, and good luck tales, woo.
That just about does it for this historical year. I've talked about the new president and pop culture such as movies, music, and television, but I'd like to close out my discussion on this year by acknowledging some very notable deaths. I hope I have my months right. I think I have my months right. January 1989, Ted Bundy's bitch ass is executed. April 1989, the world said goodbye to a legend, Miss Lucille Ball of I Love Lucy. June 1989, 80s icon, the actor who played Sloth in Goonies just 4 years prior. And, little known fact, even to myself as I only recently discovered this, the man also was a 2-time Super Bowl champion with the Raiders. He passed away in 1989. And finally, actress Rebecca Schaefer. In a recent episode, I paid tribute to one of the stars of the original Poltergeist, Dominique Dunne. who on Halloween Eve in 1982 was strangled by her ex-boyfriend, strangled into a coma from which she never woke. Well, in 1989, another up-and-coming actress, about the same age as Miss Dunn was gunned down by an obsessed fan. And before she breathed her last breath, Rebecca Schaefer looked at her attacker, her killer, and uttered her very last word.
Stay tuned for part 3, where the 80s Kinda Guy show concludes with the ultimate 80s versus 80s battle.
By the power of Grayskull!
For the honor of Grayskull!
Looks like double trouble.